Last November, President Biden pushed what was to have been a, quote, major effort to curb gas prices.
Fast forward to today, and Americans are facing 2 weeks of record high prices at the pump. Gas is up over 35% with no sign of relief at gas stations. The Biden administration is now considering lifting gasoline environmental rules to lower fuel costs, according to Reuters. I see Briahna rolling her eyes, although I would love if we did that, lift all those environmental rules. Our cameraman Steve just blamed me, saying this is a hex because I bought a car at the very beginning of January, and this has all happened after this. So I don't know what I did, but there you go. You can blame Robby.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, I'm sure if I Googled it, I could give you some huge number that represent the profits that the oil and gas companies are making. So the question isn't
massive.
So the question isn't, is there enough, at the end of the day, it's price squeezing that's happening. And let's not forget that this is largely because of the geopolitical conflicts that we have chosen to get into as a country overseas. Pretending like it's all of these kind of local domestic factors or it's the result of Biden's sheer kind of will of force or just being a bad guy. Look, I don't care about Joe Biden, but let's actually talk about the root causes of these issues. We, had great coverage by Ken Klippenstein over at The Intercept about, the Saudi Arabia's unwillingness to do business with Joe Biden because of having felt disrespected before, how they won't help him keep the gas prices down, how the conflict in Ukraine is affecting all of this, and gas lines from Russia. This is the issue. So the idea that we're going to use this as an excuse to address the paltry environmental policies that we have right now, it just feels like a misdirection and just an excuse to say, let's all burn in a hellfire so that we can bring down the gas.
The Saudi Arabia example is pretty frustrating because our, playing nice with them and overlooking their horrific human rights records and everything else they're doing, we did that solely for strategic reasons so that in the event of a conflict with Russia, like the conflict we're having right now, they could let the oil flow and we wouldn't suffer pain. They are absolutely not doing that at all. Major foreign policy miscalculation, a bipartisan miscalculation that is embarrassing. So that should be the end of that notion.
Well, so it's probably, the truth is in both sides on this one, in my opinion. I mean, absolutely, you bring up really great points, Briahna, that there's a lot that's going into this. But because we are so reliant on countries like Saudi Arabia, and then they're saying to us, forget you guys, we've been snubbed by you, and so we don't really want to play nice. That does kind of bring up more of the question of why are we not totally independent? Why are we not able to just rely on ourselves? Why do we have to rely on other countries and then they get to set the prices? So even with the big oil companies right now making a fortune, they actually don't even have control over that. They're just reaping in the benefits from OPEC setting the prices. But why are we so reliant on OPEC? So is there any desire at all to say, well, you know what, maybe we should be energy independent, and that energy independence can't be just looking forward to the future, saying that we're going to go to green energy that might take however long, I don't know, versus saying maybe we need to actually do something right now in the here and now in order to become oil independent. So we don't care what OPEC does.
Let's go to green energy, but let's actually open up some drilling at some point in the meantime, maybe.
Well, look,
ease the pain a little bit.
Well, if we really care about easing the pain, we could do things that other countries have done, like nationalize their energy sector so that we don't have the profits being taken out and distributed to shareholders instead of being returned to people's pockets at the pump. Historically, when countries around the world have chosen that, democratically chosen to go ahead and do that, oftentimes America sends in our regime change instruments to make sure that kind of intervention doesn't spread around the world. Yeah. Bernie Sanders talked about the Green New Deal as a as a foreign policy tool for exactly this reason, that we shouldn't have this foreign reliance on oil. And when he brought this up in 2016, he was almost laughed off the stage, the idea that these kinds of issues would have that kind of geopolitical effect. But here we are. And so we can keep talking about how in the future, we need to implement the policies. The reality is that now is the time, 10, 20 years ago is the time. And people who bring it up kind of as something that isn't going to work right now because people are feeling the pain right now, they're not actually committed to having the World War II style of ramping up that we need to, so that 5, 10, 15 years from now, we're not talking about the next war that our children are dying in because we didn't have the commitment to do what we needed to do to get energy independence today.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with.
I
both
just threw my
sides.
pen because I was so outraged by your nationalized.
Oh, wow.
I actually dropped it, but I'm going to claim it. I can't imagine putting the federal government in greater control of production, distribution of oil would solve the problem. I think we'd probably have shortages like of baby formula instantly, but.
That was a corporation that caused us shortage of the baby formula. I have to keep reminding you, Robbie. No, it was a corporation deciding to issue shares and distribute their profits to shareholders and do stock buybacks instead of fixing the machines that make our children's food.
They're not allowed to have more baby formula companies because it's tightly regulated and we can't import what we need.
No, it's an antitrust issue. They're not being prevented from having more.
It's a regulatory issue. It's always a regulatory issue. Why we can't build things, why we can't produce things, why we can't do things here. The federal government makes it illegal.
When all you have is libertarianism, everything looks like a regulatory issue.
Well, when all you have is statism, everything looks like vast government overreach.
I offer a plurality of solutions in all of these situations.
Kim, you really do get to play the moderate today. This is so refreshing.
I really do. I know, right? I agree with both sides. I agree that all of this has to be done. I agree that we have to take some of the profits away and nationalize some of the oil, and definitely need to do that. I mean, Alaska does it, so why can't the entire country do it? Right, exactly. So, I do think we need to be doing things like that. I do think that we need to also become more oil independent from other nations. That might mean opening up some drilling, but if we also did these other things, we might not need as much because we're able to bring down the cost of gasoline. And, I just think it's a multi-pronged solution. All of these solutions are good ideas. I think if we did all of it, then we wouldn't have to do as much of all of it as well. Yeah. We could do a little of everything, and that would maybe solve the problem. But the problem is that this discussion has become so politically polarized that people can't stop and actually have a good conversation about it and say, yeah, I agree, and I agree. Instead, you guys are throwing pens at each other. And that's like both sides of the aisle doing that.
That was accidental. No workplace of violence here. Don't sick OSHA on me. That's another thing I wouldn't like.
Yeah. Just a quick reminder that even opening up drilling takes time the same way that Green New Deal type reforms takes time. Everything takes time. There's no quick fixes here. But I'm sure you all remember the Putin price hike. Well, the White House coined the phrase after Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. They tried again this week, but CNN's Jake Tapper wasn't having it. Let's take a listen.
Well, we're doing everything we can to try to bring those prices down. As you know, this all emanates from Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, which took Russian oil off the market.
Not all of it. I mean, some of it, yes.
I mean, I'm surprised that
I like Tapper. Sometimes he does push back against like ridiculous talking points. Sometimes. Sorry, go ahead.
More so than the other. Right? I mean, more so than the others. And it is kind of impressive that CNN is now pushing back finally at the Biden administration. But how can you not at this point? Everything's falling apart. At this point, you can't just continue to go on and say, everything's like hunky-dory and everything's Putin's problem. No, we actually live in the United States. I don't know why we give Putin that much power. The idea that man has that much power over our own nation and our own economy seems, at this point, it is comical. You just can't blame it on him.
Well, the issue with Putin's price hike is pretending like America didn't have any choice, decision making in escalating the conflict the way it did, and continuing the conflict by providing weapons the way it has done, right? And also the idea that having created that or contributed to the situation that's ongoing there, that you therefore don't have a responsibility to do what you can do, what is in your control domestically. That I think is where I would push back, and I'm not sure what Jake Tapper said after that, but I would have liked to see that kind of substantive commentary.
And it also just ignores the fact that this was going on. Inflation was happening prior to Russia invading Ukraine. This is not a sudden problem that, when Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly we started getting inflation. We were having runaway inflation prior to this point. Remember when they said it was transitory? And then suddenly they realized, it's not transitory. And then luckily Russia invades Ukraine and they could say, no, it was Russia. Russia did it. Right?
It's COVID. It's the supply chain issues. People understand how supply and demand works, except for some reason when it comes to supply chain issues, COVID, and the fact that we're just not getting the goods that we've offshored to the rest of the world. We're just not getting the goods that we used to get in the time that we used to get. And because corporations decided not to pay for storage units in the United States so that we could have stockpiles of essential needs, decided not to build things and make things in America in a way that could give American people jobs, and instead of offshore to places where they can exploit the labor conditions overseas, now consumers are paying the price. And if you listen to some of the early commentary on this, by the way, from 2020, you had these places like NPR, these liberal radios, blaming consumers for the fact that, they just wanted cheap goods. That's why we had to do all of this, as though it wasn't always about profits being distributed to the elites in this country. And that's why we had this enormous gap between what the American worker makes and what the CEO makes. That is something like 10 times more extreme than it was 40, 50 years ago when we actually made things here in our own country.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
I agree.
Well, up next, we'll discuss the broader implications of yesterday's tragic killing of elementary school students and the debate around gun reform with our rising panel. Stick around for that.